The morning started in a slow, quiet way. The kind of morning where the air feels soft and the sunlight comes in gently without trying to show off. The community music center sat at the end of a narrow street, its windows glowing with a warm golden color as students arrived for their weekend practice. It wasn't a fancy place. The paint outside was fading in some spots, and the wooden door creaked every time someone opened it. But inside, the building felt full of life. The walls were lined with old photos of recitals, dusty trophies, and handwritten notes from past students who once dreamed big in the same rooms. Kids and teenagers gathered near the hallway, chatting about their week, comparing sheet music, and laughing about little things only they understood. A few carried their instruments with pride, and others walked empty-handed. The instructors moved around the rooms with warm smiles, calling out greetings to almost everyone who walked in. Almost everyone near the end of the hallway. The old wooden door opened again, but this time no one turned around. A girl stepped inside slowly, holding an old music folder pressed tightly against her chest. She looked around for a moment as if unsure whether she belonged there. Her clothes were simple, her posture a little careful, and her steps quiet enough that she could have slipped past without leaving a sound. She looked like someone who didn't want to take space from anyone. Most of the students assumed she must be new. She had that look about her, the quiet scanning of the room, slight hesitation before taking a step, the way she kept her gaze low, as if she didn't want to bother anyone. New students almost always carried some version of that expression. She walked to the back of the practice hall, where the lights were softer and where fewer people sat. The long piano benches in the back were usually left empty, used mostly by students waiting for their turn or trying to warm up alone. She chose the seat closest to the wall, placed her folder down gently, and sat with her hands folded in her lap. Even though she tried to blend in, some people noticed her right away. A few students whispered to each other, their curiosity obvious. Who was she? Which class was she joining? Was she here for the beginners group? Or someone's guest? No one had seen her before. No one walked in with her. But no one went up to her either. It wasn't because anyone was unfriendly. They were simply used to the weekend routine. They talked to the same friends, joked with the same people, sat in their usual spots. The new girl seemed too quiet, too unsure. So most thought it was better not to make her uncomfortable by crowding her. One of the instructors, a patient man who had worked there for years, took a quick glance around and noticed her. He gave her a small smile from across the room, the kind given to shy newcomers who might need a bit of time to open up. She nodded back politely but didn't speak. The director of the center clapped her hands together, signaling everyone to settle down for the morning warm-up. The soft chatter in the room faded little by little as students picked their spots. Some sat at pianos, some stood beside keyboards, some grabbed their sheet music from their bags. "Let's start with something simple today," the director said warmly. "Just a few scales to wake up your fingers and get your mind focused." Everyone began playing small, familiar notes. The sound filled the hall like a gentle wave knot, loud enough to overwhelm, but strong enough to feel alive. Even students who weren't fully awake yet loosened up their shoulders and joined in. Everyone except the girl at the back. She didn't move from her seat. Her hands stayed still in her lap, and she watched the others with a calm expression. It didn't look like she wasn't paying attention. In fact, she seemed to be listening more closely than anyone else. But she made no attempt to join the warm-up. A few students glanced her way again, whispering quietly. "Maybe she's not here for piano," one murmured. "Then why sit in the piano room?" Another whispered back. Someone else said, "She probably doesn't know how to play." No one said it in a mean way. They said it the same way kids talk about the weather, just simple curiosity. Nothing sharp in their tone. The warm-up continued for a few minutes until the director called everyone to a pause. "Great. Now that you're awake, we'll begin today's practice. I want each of you to play a short piece you've been working on. Doesn't need to be perfect, just something to show your progress." This was part of the routine. Every weekend, students shared their pieces so the instructors could help them improve. Some enjoyed performing and looked forward to it. Others felt nervous every time. The room always filled with different levels of confidence. As the first student stepped forward, the new girl watched quietly. She listened as the notes filled the room again, this time more polished, more expressive. She paid attention to every sound, the way the fingers moved, the slight mistakes, the tiny moments of hesitation, the confidence in some parts and uncertainty in others. Her eyes followed each player closely, almost studying them. One of the instructors noticed this and whispered to the director, "She's observing everything." The director nodded. "Maybe she's just nervous." The second and third students finished their pieces. The instructors began looking at the girl at the back, waiting for the moment to ask who she was and whether she wanted to play. After a few more performances, the director finally approached her with a warm smile. "Hi," she said kindly. "I don't think we've met before. Are you new?" The girl hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I'm just here to watch today. Would you like to join us?" The director asked gently. "Even if you're new, you're welcome to share something. Anything at all." The girl shook her head softly. Maybe later. "I haven't played in a while." Her voice was quiet but clear. Everyone nearby heard the uncertainty in it, and to them, it confirmed their assumption. A beginner, or maybe someone who had taken a few lessons long ago and forgotten most of it. The director didn't push her. "That's fine. You can play whenever you feel ready." The girl nodded gratefully and lowered her eyes again. More students continued to play, one after another. Some performed confidently, others struggled a little, but everyone received encouragement and gentle corrections. The room felt warm and supportive. It's a kind of place where even small mistakes didn't feel scary. Hours passed slowly but pleasantly, filled with the sound of young musicians learning, trying, and growing. The girl at the back stayed silent through it all. She kept watching, listening with a focus that was almost too strong for someone who was supposedly just a beginner. Every time someone played, she seemed to understand something deeper about the music, something she didn't put into words. A few students glanced at her again, still unsure what to think. "She's so quiet," someone whispered. "Maybe she's scared to mess up," another said. "I don't blame her," a third replied. First days are tough, but no one expected anything extraordinary from her. She looked like someone you had to teach from the beginning, someone who needed slow guidance and gentle encouragement. As the practice session neared its end, the director took another look at the girl. "Are you sure you don't want to try?" The director asked once more, her voice soft. The girl paused. She looked down at her hands, then at the old music folder beside her. For a long second, she didn't move. Then she whispered, "Can I? Can I go last?" The director smiled warmly. Of course. A few students raised their eyebrows. Someone going last usually meant they needed extra time to gather courage. It's a beginner's habit. But the girl didn't seem nervous in the usual way. She looked calm, almost too calm, as if she wasn't afraid of making mistakes, but afraid of something else. Entirely, no one knew then that her calmness meant something completely different. No, one knew the hall was about to witness something unforgettable, for now. She still looked like a new student, quiet, uncertain, and holding an old music folder as if she was scared to let it go. No one had the faintest idea that behind that calm face was a story that would change the way everyone in that room saw music, talent, and even themselves. Her moment was coming, quietly and steadily, just like she had walked into the room. And no one, not the students, not the instructors, not even the director, had the slightest guess about the brilliance. She was hiding behind her silence. The room slowly settled again after a short break. But even during that break, the girl sitting in the back remained still, as if she didn't want to disturb anything around her. She watched the others refill their water bottles, stretch their arms, and chat with their friends. Some gathered near the door to get fresh air, while others stayed near the pianos, going over their pieces again. She didn't move from her seat. Her old music folder stayed on her lap, her fingers lightly touching its edge, as if she were afraid it might slip away. The morning sun had shifted by then, casting a softer tone on the back of the hall. From where she sat, the light didn't reach her fully. It touched her just enough to make her look like a shadow blending into the wall. You could walk by her and barely notice. She was there if you weren't paying attention, but she was paying attention to everything. The instructors called everyone back to their places. Voices slowly lowered, chairs scraped softly against the floor, and the students settled again. The atmosphere felt familiar but somehow slightly heavier, as if everyone knew the second half of practice always mattered a bit more. The stronger performances usually happened around this time, when students were warmed up and feeling more confident. The quiet girl shifted in her seat but didn't open her folder. She kept her eyes on the piano at the front of the room, watching how light reflected off the polished surface. It was the same piano everyone used for performances, the one she would have to approach. If she kept her promise to play last, she watched a student walk up to the piano and begin a lively piece full of fast notes. The student stumbled in a few places but kept going bravely, determined to finish. The instructors nodded in approval. They weren't expecting perfection. They just wanted to see effort. The girl observed the whole performance closely. She seemed to notice every detail, the pacing, the timing, even the small mistakes. When the student finished and the room applauded, she clapped as well. But her eyes were far more thoughtful than anyone else's. Another student stepped forward, then another. Each performance filled the room with its own rhythm, its own feeling. Some pieces were soft like raindrops, some bold like a marching drum, and some unsure like a shaky breath. The girl seemed to absorb each one, as if she wasn't simply listening but learning something from every note. She sat upright, attentive in a way that made her look like she understood music more deeply than she admitted. She wasn't restless or bored. She wasn't distracted. She was quietly focused, something only a few people in the room noticed. One instructor leaned toward another and whispered, "She listens like she knows something." The other nodded slightly. "Maybe she's played before." The director, who always paid close attention to expressions, noticed the girl's thoughtful eyes. The director didn't know what her story was or what she could do, but something about the girl's calmness didn't match the nervous energy most beginners had. The girl didn't look afraid of the piano. She looked like someone who respected it. A boy sitting a few rows ahead kept sneaking glances at her. He whispered to his friend, "Do you think she'll play something today?" His friend shrugged. "Probably just some small practice tune," another student added. "Yeah, she seems way too nervous to play anything big." None of them meant anything unkind. They were simply making the same assumption everyone else did. She looked new. She looked unsure. And that usually meant simple melodies, short attempts, hands searching for the right keys. But if anyone had looked closely, they would have noticed something small but important. Every time one of the students played a wrong note, the girl's fingers twitched slightly, even though they remained on her lap. It wasn't judgment. It wasn't impatience. It was memory. Memory of where her own fingers used to go. As more performances continued, the room's energy grew steadier. People were relaxed but focused. The instructors clapped with encouragement each time a student finished their piece. The director praised improvements and gave suggestions kindly. It was a safe place to try, fail, try again. Yet the girl remained quiet. She opened her old music folder for the first time since she entered the hall. The paper inside was worn at the edges, and the ink on the pages had faded slightly. It wasn't new sheet music. It wasn't something printed recently. Instead, it looked like notes that had been handled often, maybe practiced many times long ago. She ran her finger along the first line of notes, tracing the shape of the melody without playing it. For a moment, her eyes softened, not with fear, but with something that looked almost like longing. But she closed the folder after only a few seconds, almost as if she thought opening it too long might reveal too much. A small group of students nearby noticed her. "For the first time since the break ended, do you think she even knows how to play?" One whispered. "I don't know," another answered. "She hasn't touched a single piano yet." She looked scared, a third added. But she didn't look scared, she looked thoughtful. Still, because she didn't smile. Didn't talk, didn't join conversations. People filled the silence with their own stories. The director walked toward her again, stopping a few steps away. "You're still okay with going last?" The director asked kindly. The girl hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Her voice was soft, but steady. "All right," the director said with a warm expression. "Take your time. No one expects anything difficult. Just play whatever feels comfortable." The girl nodded again, though something in her eyes suggested she understood the message differently. One instructor whispered to another, "She seems so calm." "Strange for a beginner." "Maybe she's not a beginner," the other replied quietly. But no one pushed further. They respected the quietness she carried, even if they didn't fully understand it. A few more students finished their pieces. Some played with strong confidence, others with shaky hands. The room was filled with learning, growth, and effort. And through all of it, the girl watched without missing a single detail. She wasn't comparing herself to anyone. She wasn't anxious about performing. She simply sat there, absorbing the music as if it were something sacred. When the second-to-last student played, the girl finally adjusted her posture slightly. She placed her hands on the old music folder again, holding it a little tighter this time. Her shoulders rose and fell with a slow breath. She wasn't nervous, she was preparing. Something inside her was waking up. The last student before her finished playing, receiving warm applause from the room. The director smiled proudly at them, then turned toward the quiet girl at the back. "Your turn whenever you're ready," the director said gently. All eyes shifted toward her. The air in the room changed subtly. Not because anyone expected something spectacular, but because everyone finally realized they didn't know anything about her, not her story, not her experience, not even her real reason for being there. The girl didn't move at first. She sat still, letting the moment settle. She took another deep breath and slowly stood up. The old music folder pressed against her chest again as she stepped away from the bench. Her footsteps were light, it's almost too soft to hear. She walked between the rows of seats, passing by students who watched her with a mix of curiosity and quiet support. No one laughed, no one whispered loudly. They simply waited. She reached the front of the room and stood before the piano. The polished wood reflected a faint image of her face. She placed her music folder on the small ledge near the keys, but she didn't open it. Not yet. The room was silent now. The kind of silence that happens when everyone shares the same breath. The girl lowered herself onto the bench slowly, adjusting her distance from the piano. Her hands rested on her knees. Fingers curled slightly. She looked at the keys with an expression no one expected, a mixture of affection, fear, memory, and something close to grief. No one knew what she was thinking. No one knew what she had been holding inside her quietness all morning, and still. Everyone assumed she would play something simple, a basic melody, a beginner's piece, something soft and short. But there was a calmness in her that didn't match those expectations. It was the calmness of someone trying to control something powerful inside them. She lifted her hands slowly. Her fingers hovered above the keys. Everyone leaned in slightly. And, for the first time since she walked into the hall, she looked less like a new student and more like someone who had once belonged to a world far deeper than anyone in that room. Understood what she was about to play would change everything. But in that moment, before the first note, the room saw only a quiet girl with an old music folder, someone who didn't speak, didn't show off, and didn't demand attention. Someone who seemed ordinary. Yet nothing about what was coming next was ordinary at all. For a few long seconds, the room held its breath as the girl sat in front of the piano. Her hands were raised just above the keys, not touching them yet, only hovering as if they were waiting for her permission to begin. The students watched with a quiet curiosity, some leaning slightly forward in their seats. The instructors exchanged glances, unsure what to expect. The director stood with her arms gently crossed, her expression soft but attentive. The girl's fingers trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from something else, the weight of returning to something she had once loved deeply. She blinked slowly, as if steadying her thoughts, then gently placed her fingers on the keys. For the first time that day, she touched the piano. The keys felt cool, familiar. She pressed down on one very lightly, testing the sound. It was soft and clean. She pressed another, then another. The notes floated into the room like warm air drifting through an open window. They were simple, but the way she played them, the softness, the steadiness, the emotion made them feel more alive than any warm-up note anyone else had played that morning. She paused again. The room stayed silent. Then, without looking down at her sheet music, she took a slow breath and let her hands fall naturally into place, and she began to play. The first few notes were gentle, rising and falling like a calm breeze. They carried a sweetness that made people raise their heads a little higher. The sound was clear, smooth, balanced, not rushed, not stiff. It was the kind of playing that didn't try to impress anyone. It still drew attention instantly. A few students exchanged surprised glances. "That's not beginner playing," one whispered under their breath. Another student's eyes widened slightly. "She's good. Really good." The instructors, who had seen many students come and go, recognized something even more quickly. This wasn't just a student who practiced at home. This was someone who had once played often, someone who understood music emotionally, not only technically. Her fingers moved with a grace that didn't come from fresh learning. They flowed like they had once known these keys intimately. But the music she played wasn't a familiar song. It wasn't one of the common student pieces or any well-known classical tune. It was something different, something personal, something that held pieces of her story. It started slowly, almost like a conversation with the keys. The notes were soft, thoughtful, as if she was asking questions. Then the melody gently grew stronger, as if she was answering those questions, allowing her thoughts to rise. The room still and quiet. Listened closely. The girl played with a mix of tenderness and hidden strength. Her shoulders relaxed, her breathing steadied, and her whole posture shifted from that of a shy newcomer to someone who belonged completely in that moment. The music began to expand. Her hands grew more confident, moving faster but never carelessly. She transitioned into deeper, richer chords that filled the room with warmth. The melody curved upward, bright and hopeful, then dipped softly into something that felt like longing. The students stared in awe. "She's amazing," someone whispered. "Where did she learn to play like that?" Another murmured. One student near the front couldn't look away. "It's like she's telling a story." She was. Every rise in the melody felt like a memory of a time she once loved music freely. Every slow, gentle descent felt like moments she had lost that joy. The entire piece felt like her heart was speaking for the first time in a long while. The instructors watched quietly, understanding something deeper. This wasn't the playing of someone who had recently started practicing. This was the playing of someone who had once lived inside music, someone who may have stopped for reasons no one knew. The director's lips parted slightly as she listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't speak. She simply let the girl play. The girl's fingers moved effortlessly across the piano as the melody built again, reaching a gentle but powerful peak. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. But it was incredibly emotional, the kind of emotion that doesn't shout, but still reaches everyone in the room. Then the music softened gradually. Her hands slowed, the notes growing lighter, quieter, almost whisper-like. She didn't want the piece to end. Anyone could sense that. She held on to the last few notes gently, lingering on them as if they were the final words of a sentence she wasn't ready to finish. Then, with a final soft chord, she let the sound fade. Silence followed. Not the usual silence between performances. This one felt heavier, deeper, full of unspoken feelings. The students looked at each other wide-eyed. The instructors stood very still. The director's eyes softened with understanding. For a long moment, no one moved. Finally, someone started clapping softly, then another and another within seconds. The entire room filled with warm, heartfelt applause. Not loud applause, just genuine, gentle appreciation. The girl didn't smile widely, but her eyes brightened slightly, as if the applause touched a part of her she hadn't expected. She lowered her hands from the piano keys and folded them quietly in her lap. "That was beautiful," one of the instructors said softly, stepping forward. "May I ask, where did you learn to play like that?" The girl hesitated. Her eyes lowered, her voice soft. "I used to play a lot. A long time ago." "Sounds like you still play here," the instructor said, gently tapping their chest. The girl blinked, unsure how to respond. The director stepped closer, her expression kind. You don't have to tell us your whole story, but I'm glad you shared your music with us today. The girl nodded slightly. Thank you. A few students approached carefully. That was amazing. One said shyly. You're really talented, another added. The girl looked surprised. She wasn't used to receiving compliments. She looked at the floor, then back up. Thank you, she said again, almost whispering. One of the older students stood next to her. You didn't even use your sheet music. She glanced at her old folder. This isn't the piece I played. The student frowned. Then why bring it? She held the folder carefully. Because it's the only music I've kept. Someone gave it to me. A long time ago. Student's expression softened. The other students stepped a little closer, suddenly more curious about her, not in a nosy way, but in a genuinely warm and respectful way. Do you still play often? Someone asked. She shook her head. No, I stopped for a while. Instructor gently added. Well, if that's what you sound like after stopping, I can't imagine how incredible you must have been before. The girl lowered her eyes again. She didn't answer right away. After a moment, she said quietly, I used to play every day. It was the one thing that made me feel calm. What happened? One of the younger students asked softly. The girl looked at the piano keys instead of the people around her. She traced a pattern on the smooth wood with her fingertip. Life happened, she said simply. No one asked more. They could sense she didn't want to talk about it yet. The director gave her a gentle smile. Well, whenever you're ready to play again, whether here or somewhere else, you have a gift that deserves to be heard. The girl nodded, her eyes warm with gratitude. As the students slowly moved back to their seats, the girl stood near the piano for a moment longer. Touching the keys lightly with one finger, one of the instructors approached her again. If you want, we can help you get back into playing. You don't have to do it alone. Her expression softened. Maybe I'll think about it. Instructor nodded kindly and stepped back. The girl picked up her old music folder and held it close to her chest again. The same way she did when she first walked into the hall. But something about her posture had changed. She didn't look as unsure anymore. She didn't look like someone trying to hide. She looked like someone remembering who she used to be as she walked back to her seat. Several students gave her small smiles. Others nodded quietly in respect. She returned their gestures with tiny, grateful lifts of her eyes. The atmosphere had shifted completely. She no longer blended into the background. She wasn't invisible anymore. She had arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, but now after playing a piece that felt like a window to her heart. Everyone in that room saw her, and without realizing it, her music had begun to change things not only for herself, but for the people who heard it, even though she didn't know it yet. Her journey with music wasn't just restarting. It was opening a new chapter she hadn't expected. A chapter that would bring new challenges, new people, and new discoveries. But in that moment, she only knew one thing. Playing again felt right, more right than anything had felt in a long time, and somewhere deep inside her, something long asleep began to wake fully. The room stayed quiet for a long moment after she finished playing, as if everyone was still trying to understand what they had just heard. The last note had faded slowly, almost like it didn't want to leave the air. She kept her hands on the keys even after the sound was gone, breathing softly, her shoulders rising and falling in a calm rhythm. It was the first time she looked peaceful since she had stepped into the music center that morning. She didn't turn around right away. Maybe she was afraid of what she would see on their faces. Maybe she needed a moment to catch her breath. Or maybe the piano reminded her of something she was not yet ready to let go of. When she finally stood up, she held her old music folder close to her chest. It looked more worn than before, as if the memories inside it had been touched again after a long time. The students in the room sat so still that even the sound of someone shifting in their chair would have felt loud. The director took a small step forward, still looking surprised. He wasn't the type of person who got shocked easily. He had been teaching for years, and he had heard all kinds of performances. But there was something different about her playing. It wasn't just talent. It was emotion, deep and raw. It's a kind that only comes from someone who has lived through something difficult. He spoke gently, almost careful with his words, as if he didn't want to break whatever fragile moment she was holding on to. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. She didn't answer at first. She looked down at her shoes, then at her hands, as if she was remembering something. Her voice came out soft when she finally spoke, and the room leaned in to hear her. "I learned at home. I used to practice every day," she said. Someone asked, "Who taught you?" But not in a rude way. It was more like a whisper from someone who genuinely wanted to know. She took a quiet breath. "My grandfather," she said. The way she said the word told everyone that he had been important to her, someone she trusted, someone who had shaped her world. She took another breath and held her music folder even tighter. "He loved music more than anything," she continued softly. "He used to sit next to me during every practice. He never missed a single day. Even when he was tired, he would listen. Sometimes he fell asleep in the chair, but he still stayed with me." A small, sad smile touched her face. "He said the piano sounded different when I played. He said it felt alive." The director nodded slowly, understanding more than she had said. "Did he teach you everything?" another student asked. "Yes," she said. "He taught me how to hold my hands, how to listen, how to feel the music instead of just playing it." He told. "Mean that if I ever felt alone, I should sit at the piano and play something soft." He said the piano would answer back. Her voice got quieter. "But I stopped playing for a long time." The room held its breath again. The director asked gently, "Why?" She shook her head slightly, as if the memory still hurt to touch. "After he passed away, I couldn't play anymore. The piano reminded me of him. Every note felt heavy. Even looking at the keys made me feel like something was missing." Her eyes softened in a distant way. "I tried to practice once after he was gone, but I couldn't finish even a single song. I closed the lid and didn't open it again." She looked around the room for the first time, meeting the eyes of the other students. She wasn't crying, but her eyes looked deep and full. "I joined this place because I thought maybe being around other people would help me. Maybe I could try again." She paused. "But I didn't think I would actually be able to play anything today." The director stepped closer to her. Not too close, just enough to show support. "You didn't just play," he said. "You shared something. That was more than a performance. That was a story." She lowered her gaze again, as if she was not used to receiving compliments. One of the students said quietly, "We thought you were new, like a beginner." She gave a tiny laugh, the first warm sound from her all day. "I guess I looked nervous," she said. Another student spoke. "No, it's just that you sat in the back and didn't warm up with any of us. We didn't think you could play like that." She nodded. "I didn't warm up because I wasn't sure if I could. I didn't want to embarrass myself. I just wanted to watch and maybe try next time." She looked down again. "But when the director asked me to play, something inside me said to try, just once." The director smiled at her gently. "I'm glad you listened to that voice." She didn't respond, but her posture loosened a little, as if a weight had been lifted. The students around her slowly began to ask small questions. Not in a way that overwhelmed her, but in a way that showed they were genuinely curious and touched. They wanted to know what songs she liked. They wanted to know how long she had been practicing before she stopped. They wanted to know if she ever composed her own music. She answered each question softly, choosing her words with care. She wasn't used to talking about herself, but the room felt safe enough. "I used to practice in the afternoons," she said. "My grandfather said the sunlight made the music feel warmer. He would open the window and let the breeze in, and I would play for hours. Some days I didn't even stop for dinner unless he reminded me." One student smiled. "He must have been proud of you." Her eyes softened. "Yes," she whispered. "He was." The director looked around at the students. "You all saw something special today," he said. "Not just skill, not just practice. You saw what music looks like when it comes from the heart." She shifted slightly, almost embarrassed by the praise. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She had only wanted to try. But now she stood in front of people who had listened to her in a way she hadn't expected. The director looked at her again. "If you're willing, I would like you to join our advanced group. You don't have to rush. We'll move at a pace that feels right for you." She blinked in surprise, completely taken off guard. Advanced? She repeated softly. Yes, he said with a warm smile. You belong there. She hesitated, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of her music folder. I don't know if I'm ready, she said honestly. I haven't played for so long. Still feel unsure. And I don't want anyone to think I'm trying to take someone else's place. The director shook his head. No one is losing anything. We grow together. You bring something special to the group, something we don't want to miss. The other students nodded in agreement, some shyly, some openly. They weren't jealous. They were impressed, inspired even. Her talent didn't push anyone down. It lifted the whole room. Another student added softly, You should join. You played with feeling. We want that in our group. She looked around at all the faces watching her, not with judgment, but with hope. She didn't expect them to understand her story. She didn't expect them to accept her so quickly, but somehow they did. Okay, she said after a long moment. Her voice was small, but there was a new steadiness in it. I can try, but I want to start slow. I still need time. The director nodded warmly. Of course, we'll take it step by step. Something in her relaxed at those words. It felt like someone had opened a door she thought was locked forever. She wasn't being rushed. She wasn't being pushed. She was being welcomed. The tension in the room slowly faded as conversations picked up again. Students talked quietly among themselves, but not in whispers now. They weren't gossiping or trying to figure her out. They were simply curious and kind, wanting to understand someone who had carried something heavy for so long. She walked back to her seat, the old music folder still held close, but now her steps felt a little lighter. For the first time since she arrived that morning, she didn't feel out of place. She didn't feel like a beginner pretending to belong. She felt like she was part of something again, something that didn't hurt to touch. She sat down quietly, listening to the soft sounds of movement around her. The piano stood in the front of the room, waiting silently, and she looked at it with a different feeling than before. Not fear, not sadness, something gentler, something like hope. She didn't know what the next days would bring. She didn't know if she would struggle or if she would find her rhythm again quickly. But she knew one thing. She had taken the first step, and it hadn't broken her. It opened something inside her that she thought was gone. The director walked to the front again and spoke to the class. But she didn't hear all of it. She was lost in her thoughts, thinking of her grandfather. Thinking of the window with the sunlight. Thinking of the afternoons she once spent practicing until the room felt full of warmth. For the first time in a long while, those memories didn't hurt. They felt like something she could hold on to without breaking, and maybe, just maybe, she could make new memories too. She looked at the piano again, and this time she didn't look away. The rest of the day at the music center moved slowly, almost softly, as if the moment she played the piano had changed the air. The students were quieter than usual, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that came from boredom or awkwardness. It was the quiet that followed something meaningful, the kind that made people think a little deeper than they usually did. She stayed in her seat, listening to the small sounds around her. And for the first time, those sounds didn't make her feel nervous. She didn't feel like she had to hide. She didn't feel like she didn't belong. When the session ended, people didn't rush toward the door like they usually did. A few students lingered near her, not too close, giving her space but still showing they cared. One of them asked if she planned to come again next week. Another said they hoped she would. She wasn't used to attention, and she didn't quite know how to respond, but their kindness warmed something inside her. She stepped out of the building slowly, the sunlight hitting her face in a gentle way. It felt different now, almost like the world was a little lighter. She took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the day mix with the memory of what she had just done. She hadn't expected any of it. She hadn't planned to play. She hadn't planned to share her story. She certainly hadn't planned to be invited into the advanced group. But sometimes life moved in small, unexpected ways, guiding people to places they didn't realize they were ready for. Walking home, she held her old music folder tightly, not because she was afraid of losing it, but because it suddenly felt important again. Those pages, those markings, those handwritten notes from her grandfather, they weren't just memories anymore. They were pieces of her she could carry forward, not pieces she had to hide from. That night, she sat on her bed with the folder open beside her. She touched the edges of the pages gently, her eyes tracing the faded pencil marks. Some of the notes were smudged from the days when her grandfather would lean over too close and accidentally brush the sheet. Others had tiny stars drawn next to them because he liked the way certain chords sounded. She found herself smiling quietly. Her room felt a little warmer than usual, as if the memory of that day in the music center had followed her home. She didn't feel the same heaviness she used to feel when thinking about the piano. It still made her heart ache a little, but it wasn't the sharp pain it once was. It was softer, like a reminder of something beautiful that she wasn't ready to let go of. She didn't touch her home piano that night, but she did sit beside it. She ran her fingers along the smooth top of the lid, feeling its familiar texture. It felt comforting, not overwhelming. She whispered softly, almost as if someone was listening. "I tried today." She paused. "I hope you'd be proud." The next week at the music center felt different even before she entered the building. She walked with a little more confidence. Not because she thought she was better than anyone, but because she had taken a step she never thought she would take. When she opened the door, a few students waved at her. The director smiled warmly and welcomed her in. It felt strange, but in a good way, a way that reminded her of the afternoons when her grandfather would wait by the window for her after school. The advanced group met in a smaller room at the back of the center. When she walked inside, she felt a small knot in her stomach, the same kind of nervousness she felt before performing. But the students in the room weren't intimidating. Some were older, some younger, but they all looked up with friendly expressions. They shifted their chairs to make space for her without hesitation. The director introduced her simply, not with big words or pressure, but with a gentle tone that made her feel safe. "She's joining us," he said. "She has her own story, her own journey, and she'll grow with us." She sat down quietly, feeling a mix of nerves and hope. The others began warming up, filling the room with soft melodies. She listened first, letting herself get used to the sound, the rhythm, the way their fingers moved effortlessly across the keys. She didn't play right away. She needed time, but no one rushed her. When the director asked if she wanted to try something small, she nodded slowly. She opened her folder and pulled out a simple piece, one she used to practice when she was younger. Her hands trembled a little as she sat at the piano, but it wasn't the same kind of trembling she felt when she was scared. It was more like the trembling that comes before something new. She played the piece softly, carefully, making sure each note felt right. It wasn't as emotional or grand as her performance the week before. It was simple, but sometimes simple was enough. Sometimes it was even more important. When she finished, the room gave her a small, warm applause, not loud, not dramatic, just enough to make her feel appreciated. She looked up for a moment. She could see genuine encouragement in their eyes. Over the next few weeks, she began attending the advanced group regularly. Each time she came, she grew a little more comfortable. She learned new pieces, practiced old ones, and slowly started to find her rhythm again. Some days she struggled. Some days she played beautifully. But every day she tried. The students in the group became more than just familiar faces. They became people she trusted, people she could laugh with, people who understood the quiet language of music. She didn't talk a lot, but when she did, they listened. And when she played, they understood her even more. The director encouraged her gently, always reminding her that progress wasn't measured in speed, but in consistency. He could see something in the way she played, something delicate and powerful at the same time. He never pushed her too hard. He didn't want to break the fragile hope she was rebuilding. Months passed, and soon the music center announced a small recital for all the students. It wasn't meant to be a competition or a showcase. It was simply a way to celebrate their growth. When the announcement was made, she felt a familiar weight settle on her chest. The thought of performing again in front of strangers made her nervous. But it didn't scare her the way it once did. She had already played in front of people. She had already shared a part of her heart, and she had survived. The director approached her after class one day and asked if she wanted to perform in the recital. She hesitated a moment before answering. "Do you think I can?" she asked. He smiled gently. "I don't think you can," he said. "I know you can." She took a slow breath and nodded. "Okay, I'll try." Choosing the piece to perform took time. She looked through her folder for days, trying to decide if she should play something simple or something emotional. In the end, she chose the same piece she had played the first day, the one that had stunned the room into silence. Not because she wanted attention, but because it meant something to her. It was the last piece she had practiced with her grandfather. It was the piece that reminded her of warmth and sunlight. On the day of the recital, she arrived early. The room was decorated with soft lights and chairs arranged neatly in rows. Families, friends, and students filled the seats slowly. She watched from backstage, holding her folder close, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. When her name was called, she stepped onto the stage with careful steps. The piano sat under a soft light, waiting. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her fingers on the keys. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears, but she closed her eyes for a moment and thought of the afternoons she once spent practicing by the window. She began to play. The first few notes were soft, almost hesitant, but as she continued, her hands grew steadier. The room grew quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty. The melody filled the space gently, then deeply. Each note carried a memory, a piece of her story, something she didn't have to explain with words. She didn't try to impress anyone. She didn't try to be perfect. She simply let the music speak the way her grandfather always taught her to. When the piece ended, the room stayed silent for a heartbeat just like that first day. And then the applause came, warm and full, not thunderous, but sincere. She looked up, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt proud of herself. After the recital, people approached her to tell her how beautiful her performance was. She didn't know how to respond at first, but she smiled an honest, peaceful smile. The director walked up to her last. "You did more than play," he said softly. "You shared something that people will remember." She nodded, her eyes warm. "Thank you," she whispered, as she walked out of the building that evening. The world felt different. The sky was a soft orange, and the air felt calm. She held her music folder lightly now, not with fear or sadness, but with hope. She knew her journey wasn't over. There would still be days when playing felt difficult. There would still be moments when memories felt heavy. But now she had a place where she belonged, people who supported her, and music that no longer hurt to touch. She stepped into the fading sunlight, feeling lighter than she had in a long, long time, for the first time since her grandfather passed away. She wasn't scared of the future. She was ready for it.